Welcome back to the Context Coaching Podcast. We are joined today by Melissa Fortenberry, who is the principal and founder of Heat Sense, which I'm going to let her explain a little bit more what it is, but it's an alternative way to monitor heat illness type impact in athletes. Being from Texas, it's probably something you need there a lot compared to coastal California, but super curious to see what impact this has had and how we're keeping our kids safe. So thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. All right, why don't we dive in? Take us through your background a little bit and get us caught up on how you became an inventor and what the pathway was for growing up and being in Texas and all over the world that brought you back to let's try to keep kids safe.
Sure. I guess personally, I'm originally from Texas, grew up playing sports in Texas. I was actually a soccer player, was a 4-year letterman for soccer, but did not move on to college sports. My husband actually played D1 soccer. So soccer's in our family. I went away for school, lived in New York, and was actually that's where I began my career. And it was during the internet boom and bust. And so I worked for an internet company that this was like pre-Google. All there was Yahoo. And I worked for the Yahoo for Spanish and Portuguese speakers. It was called Star Media. I speak Spanish, so I had a blast like growing that company and then seeing what happens when companies fail. And I would say that like I've chased internet companies and that kind of growth curve the rest of my career, the last 20 years being in Austin. So I now have 3 kids. They all play outdoor sports in Texas. And for anybody who's lived through the heat or participated in sports traveling in the heat, it really can impact you. And I think as a parent, we've always sat on the sidelines worried about our kids and the heat, but that's where it's stayed, is in a worry kind of bucket. But I went to my son's football game. It was 107. So the reason why I'm here today is because I went to my son's football game. It was 107 on the way, which is unusually hot. And 100's fine, but 107 is a little too much. It's not normal. So I was sitting in the stands and I got sick from the heat. So I was dizzy, I was nauseous, I couldn't catch my breath, and I couldn't recover during the game. And I think that's the first time that my worry really turned to fear. Not for me, but for all the kids on the field, like knowing that the turf was a ton hotter, that they were in pads. And so I went home and researched everything there was to learn about heat and was really disappointed in a lot of things I found. And a company was born from it. So that's why I'm here.
So, first of all, you said 100 is fine and 107 is too hot.
Yeah.
Clearly, we're living in different universe
Yeah.
because it gets to 75 and I've had enough.
Yeah.
All good. Some of us are softer than others.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you learned from this research on heat. And we were
Yeah.
talking before we started recording about how California has implemented some legislation around heat index and taking wet bulb measurements. And if it's over a certain number, you have to shut it down, even if the valley
Yeah.
index is being compared to the coastal index and it's not real. But what have you found that set the alarm bells off, so to speak, that caused you to dig in and create this system?
So I guess the one thing that's really important, or the first thing, is that if you're heat strain, it builds inside a body invisibly. And so once someone actually has symptoms from the heat, they have a form of heat illness. And all the guidelines from the pros all the way down through high school, they only deal with the symptoms of heat illness. And so dizzy, nausea, all of those things, if you have those symptoms, you're already sick. So our guidelines are managing emergencies. So that was the first kind of red flag for me, is that we're not being proactive, we're being reactive. The second one was exactly what you're talking about, was about wet bulb globe temperature. Most people just know what heat index is. And heat index is actually the temperature in the shade. No one knows that, which is why wet bulb globe temperature is used, because it's the temperature in the sun with humidity and wind. So it's more accurate for outdoor sports. The problem with it, though, is that the guidelines do exactly what you say. They apply this, let's practice for 2 hours and take 20-minute breaks every 20 minutes for 4 minutes at a time. And it could be totally irrelevant to your athletes, because every athlete shows up to practice hydrated differently, acclimated differently. Every body, every human is uniquely different. And so the weather's not going to do it. If you're applying a weather metric to your team or your athletes, you're guessing. And like you said, like where you're located, I think it's probably the humidity is busting that temperature score reading every time because you're on the coast. So if the humidity is 100% all the time, that's not going to be an accurate read for you or how your athletes react in the heat or lack thereof. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
looking to figure out the next thread to pull here is okay, so then how does that apply to the reality of kids playing sport, right? So
Yeah.
they're in the locker room, they're changing, they're heading out. What should people be aware of? And we also have to take courses on heat illness, sudden
Yeah.
cardiac, concussion. And so, like those courses, while accurate, you're saying it's too late by the time you notice the
Yeah.
symptoms. So, what is the appropriate way that coaches and athletes should be navigating this whole
Yeah.
concept of heat illness?
So the great question. And the only thing you need to understand how someone's responding to the heat is core body temperature. And core body temperature is also something I didn't know about, but it's the temperature of your organs and your blood. And it's the reason why nothing's been done about it is because the only way, the like gold standard in measuring it is a rectal thermometer. And so part of those courses is like if somebody gets sick, use a rectal thermometer. That's still what they use in the pros in college and high school. And it like then entered my technology brain. I was like, that I immediately thought that does not scale. We can't apply that to all.
Yeah, I don't think we're lining kids up over on the side at
No.
any point to do that.
Yeah. So I thought technology has to be able to solve this. And I found a technology out of Switzerland. It's actually a fitness tracker that can measure core body temperature. And it's used today in Tour de France bicycle teams. It's used, Ironman athletes use it, but it measures core body temperature. But what they're doing is using that technology to train in the heat. So they're trying to basically like simulate environments that they're going to compete in and then optimize their body for that environment. So anyway, the technology is proven. And what I've done is take that technology and partnered with thermoregulation scientists and applied a heat strain lens to it. So basically I have an app and a team dashboard and not everyone will see this online, but this is the fitness tracker. It goes on your bicep or your chest. And in real time, you can see rising heat strain across your athletes, across your team, across your roster. So the goal is to honestly keep everyone on the field. If you can, it is like data becomes the ultimate neutralizer. And instead of being subjective and saying, hey, the weather is this, you can say, actually, my entire roster is responding to the environment just fine. Let's keep practicing. Having said that, in places like Texas and the Southeast and all the hot places of the world, the opposite is true too, where you can say, actually, these two people, we need to proactively cool them to keep them in their zone. Because once you fall off that cliff, you're done.
Yeah. So how accurate are these measurements? Because right, they're putting out all these studies right now about all the fitness trackers, your Aura Rings,
Yeah.
your Whoops, your Apple
Yep.
Watches, and comparing the accuracy of HRV, of calorie metrics, of steps. And so how does this tracker that you're saying has proven science with the Ironman competition and
Yeah.
triathlons and the Tour de France, like how is this
Yeah. Yeah.
one
Any different or the
actually
same or yeah.
accurate? Yeah, like talk me through the tech on that because I find it hard to believe that an external measuring device can realistically get consistently accurate measurements of a core body temp versus just your skin
Yeah.
temp.
So the validation studies have it within a degree Celsius of accuracy. And I guess what I would
Wait, you gotta convert that to Fahrenheit
it's like
for
1.8,
okay.
1.8
Gotcha.
Fahrenheit. And so what I would say to that is we are not a medical device, so it's not meant to be diagnostic, right? And so the goal is to basically, if you're at the point at which you need a real accurate temperature, you need to be using a rectal thermometer. If you think your athlete has serious heat illness, you need to use those protocols. This is really for the proactive piece of it where we can raise a flag and say we have thresholds basically. Like your body's trying to stay within a few degrees of 98.6. That the 98.6 is actually your core body temperature. And so as we can see that rise, we can say, hey, here, throw a yellow flag, throw a red flag. Hey, we're going to alert you and say you need to have a conversation and check in. So I guess that's how I would respond to that.
So you're looking at trends basically. So wherever it
Yeah.
starts, you're just looking at the up and down of it, which makes sense. This isn't really that important for anybody but me being curious, but it is what it is. How big is the range, right? So if we
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
training this morning, we're doing our workouts, and is it 2 degree increase? Is it 4 degree
Yeah.
increase? What does that look like so that, hey, time out versus, nah, this is just normal part for the course?
It's about 3 to 4 degrees is what your body should stay within. 98.6 is what your core body temperature is at resting. It can go up at about 101, 102 is where thresholds start to kind of transition. That's where like the performance. So here's another thing. If you're proactively managing heat, you're managing performance. You're basically regaining the minutes you would have lost if you went past that threshold.
Right. Yeah.
Like every because every person is so uniquely different, it can be plus or minus a degree or
Mhm.
more for each person, but
Mhm.
in the 101 102 range is where performance starts to drop.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that's the kind of first one. And then the second one, clinically at 104, your core body temperature, that's when like can become life threatening.
Yeah, but isn't like when people take their temperature for being sick, like if it's over 102 or whatever, they're going to the hospital. So how is this different if you're saying you can get to 104?
Core body temperature can get to 104. If I go walking and it's 93 degrees outside here, just
Yeah,
walking,
yeah.
my core body temperature can get close to 102.
Oh, wild. Okay. And it
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
just not an expert on that. Okay. So how then you say they have a dashboard, everyone's got these wearables on, and how often are you checking it? How quickly does this happen? What are the protocols that you would then implement to recalibrate, bring people down? Like, how does all that work?
Yeah. I think the goal is right to be proactively cooling. I think that's another kind of area that nobody really knows about. I think we've talked to college and pro teams, and they basically say they're throwing every cooling protocol possible at their players, just hoping that it all collectively works. And we're actually going to be doing studies to know the accuracy and the effectiveness of cooling protocols. So that's coming in our future. But I would say that as you see heat strain rise, like you use the fans, use the cold water,
Mhm.
you use the cooling towels, use the ice towels, go into the AC at halftime.
Mhm.
Do all the things that you should be doing to keep those players in the range they should be in.
Do you see this as much with indoor activities as outdoor activities? Where's the kind of differentiator there as you have learned more about the landscape?
Yeah, I think it's mostly going to be outdoors. Having said that, there's plenty of gyms that don't have AC.
Mhm.
And so I know there was a case in Georgia where a high schooler died from a basketball practice. Yeah, inside a gym. There are youth athletes, college athletes dying every year from this. And
Mhm.
I would say the majority of them happen during practice, not competition, almost all of them. And most of them are outdoors, but there are cases that
Why
where
do you think the majority of them happen in practice and not competition?
because you're not exerting yourself in the same way in competition as you are in practice. Like you're not going 2 hours hard necessarily, depending. I guess I'm speaking more thinking football right now, right? You don't have the linemen running laps during a game, right? They're on and off for their 4 plays.
Interesting. This is probably outside of your scope, but do you think that then indicates that maybe practices should mirror contests more than they do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good debate to have. In Texas, for example, we went to the Coaches Association convention last summer, and all those coaches, because a lot of the practices have moved to the morning, they're actually terrified of the games now because the athletes aren't acclimated.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. So that was one of the things that they implemented last year at the state level, where there's a 5 day heat acclimation
Yeah.
period where you are now restricted from doing multiple sessions a day. Not, and again, not that this is good or bad. In the good old days, they'd
Yeah.
have double days or triple
Yeah. Yeah.
days or
2 days. Yeah.
whatever. Yeah,
Yeah.
with good rest and whatnot. But now it's like, no, the first 5 days you can only do X. Of course, the reaction is we need to start a week earlier then so that he can get that time back, which is
Yeah.
it's just how football coaches are. But
Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting because why is this just now coming up a year ago
Well,
when we've been having
I,
heat issues forever?
yeah, I do think there's a lot more research that's been done, and that is true, is that most of the heat illnesses and deaths have occurred in like the first few weeks of that summer practice. And for what it's worth, it's not just the athletes, it's the band too.
Yeah, go into that because they're suited up in those heavy
Yep.
uniforms.
Yep. The band shows up in July and has to do band camp on the concrete and those uniforms, and they're getting sick too. Last summer, there was an article from Tupelo, Mississippi, like 10 kids went to the hospital from the band. Yeah. And then, like, they're in the stands without any breaks during the games too, which in Texas, in the hot places, those a 7 o'clock game can still be 90 degrees outside.
Yeah, no doubt. Wow. Okay. So the app itself, talk a little bit more about that, ease of use, the functionality, like what the entry points are, how people
Yeah.
adopt this, etc.
Yeah, the app is for kind of the individual athlete or club player, club sport player. That you can wear the fitness tracker. The athlete has SMS alerts. So whether you want I assume that most of the time those will go to a parent or a coach, and when your phone's kind of on the sidelines. Tennis, golf, soccer, all of those sports where they're in terms of club sports are all great sports for that. The price point for the sensor is like we have a kit basically. The sensor is worn with a heart rate monitor too. You get both. Actually, here's the actual sensor.
Yeah. So you
But
have that and a heart rate monitor on the same band.
yeah, and that's part of the algorithm is
Yeah.
it uses heart rate. But it's $3.99 for the kit, and you get the strap and then the two sensors. And honestly, that you're just watching your trends, like you said. We're giving you a heat strain score, and then you can see vitals, and we'll give you insights based on how your body's reacting to the heat.
So $400 price point over the course of X number of athletes. How do
Yeah,
schools adopt this at that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
level of commitment?
Yeah, so I would say that's the individual piece of it. I think the teams program, we have a dashboard, not the app, but I guess you can access it from your phone just as easy as an iPad. And we have just a different pricing setup for teams. We know that it's going to be, I think budget's going to be a problem getting it's going to be a challenge, not a problem, into public schools. We've talked with booster clubs. We've talked with schools on how they budget. We're working with a team in North Texas right now who's just going to order like a set of 25, and they rotate the sensors through their players to figure out who actually is physiologically a little more sensitive than others. We did a pilot with a team, and this one player kept rising to the top in terms of their reaction to the heat, and they've had multiple conversations to the side before we even got there about the medications the player was using.
Oh, wow.
That could have been creating this situation where their heart rate won't slow down. Their body's not doing a great job at regulating itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So finding those kind of outliers, and then addressing people coming back from injury, coming back from illness. I think that's another way that schools are going to be able to access this, is either prioritize or think of creative ways to budget for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you found the groups you're working with where there is more interest in the clubs versus the education space?
I think that the conversations we've had with clubs, I think everyone feels overwhelmed today. There's a lot of rules. And the clubs we've talked to have felt like it's a way to empower their athletes and their parents, and thought that it would be a good thing to offer those without having to take on the team solution.
So if I hear you on that, what you're saying is they basically offer up, if I'm a member of the club and I want to opt into this, it's $400 or whatever
Yeah.
it is on top of
Yeah.
whatever my club fees are.
Yeah.
Got it. which given what people pay for club these days is probably relatively innocuous.
Yeah, you're buying how much is a helmet, how much is a bat, put
Yeah.
it how much is a cup of coffee,
Yeah.
put it into all those buckets.
Got it. Hey, if people want to learn more, find you, if they're curious, like what's your current model for outreach, for onboarding? I'm sure there's a bunch of different approaches that you're in the infancy of this thing, but I'd be curious to get that
Yeah.
information out there.
Yeah. Our website's at heatsense.com. My name's Melissa. Just email me, Melissa at heatsense.com. I'm really enjoying speaking with everyone that's reached out and having those conversations. Everyone is a learning opportunity for us to grow and evolve and figure out the right product.
In all of these conversations, that's transferable, right? So if you were to give the elevator pitch for, look, you don't have to buy this thing, but like at a bare minimum, everybody should be doing X, Y, and Z.
I think from a parent perspective, do you guys have EAP plans?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that there's an education around that as it relates to heat. I think that every parent should be asking their school or their program what their EAP plan is as it relates to heat. If there is an emergency situation, you guys need to know that there's like the school or the program's ready to respond. So I think that's a big one for me. The second one is just, I think, knowing the weather's not going to do it. And if you do have worries, like I would say to a program, like do what the school in North Texas is. They're not going to be able to get budget for everyone, but find a way to prioritize a smaller set of units to get out there.
And then in regards to that, you mentioned the EAP, right? Everybody has the heart pads on space
Yeah.
AEDs now
Yeah.
on campus. Maybe not everybody, but that's like the
Yeah.
standard of care within a minute of whatever
Yeah.
facility you're on. And other things that you think they should have readily available based on your experience
Uh,
with this.
yeah. The most important thing is the idea of cooling first and transporting second,
Okay.
is that everyone needs to have the kind of the ice tub ready and available to really get somebody dunked and cooled quickly. Never put them in an emergency vehicle without doing that first. Like they should be, you should be measuring their core body temperature with a rectal thermometer and cooling them
Okay.
on site before they ever get into an ambulance. So that's critical.
Yeah, interesting. How we're off the rails now. How prevalent have you seen this in non-traditional hot areas, so to speak? So, like where you're at, obviously there's a baseline of a temp that's very different than where I'm at. Or even if you go up north somewhere where it's rainy all the time and whatnot.
Right.
But what is the, as weird as this sounds, I would almost imagine that in hotter climates, they're better at this
Yeah.
organically than
Yeah. Yeah.
people that aren't. Like, how's
Right.
that played out in your experience?
I would say the most concrete thing I can think of is looking at the categories of guidelines for the wet bulb globe temperature.
Mhm.
If you look at, there's three categories in the United States and it's a map.
Mhm.
Basically, I think it's probably, I'd have to look at it, but it's the bottom 2/3 of the United States map is in category 3, which is
Mhm.
the highest at risk
Yep.
areas. And I definitely think whether like the northern part of the United States is not going to be as impacted as,
Right.
but I would say that the bottom 2/3
Yep.
that's what the map looks like at least.
Yeah. Yeah.
Humidity to me is the zinger. Like
Yes.
in the non-hot states, it's humidity.
Yeah.
That's the one where you can be in a normal feeling day and humidity can just take someone out.
Yeah. And that's why I'm curious about it. The areas that are in category 3 that are used to dealing with heat in general are probably better prepared for situations than people in category 1. That's, what do you
Yeah.
mean it's hot? What are you talking
Right.
about?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that they're going to be our early adopters for sure.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Cool. Besides the website, anywhere else people should be paying attention, places they can bump into you if you're at conferences and conventions and whatnot?
The website's the best place right now. So I'd love to talk to anybody who's interested in it.
Awesome. All right, we'll put all that stuff in the show notes, and if nothing else, people can get educated on the
Yeah.
seriousness. I know we've been hit over the head with it over the last few years, but it's kind of, here's your information and you're offering a solution, which is nice because they don't always have that in partnership with the what you call it, symptom management or
Right.
crisis response that we're usually getting trained in.
Yeah. Yeah. I super appreciate the time and thanks so much.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. It was good to learn about this and hopefully be more prepared moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you.